Okay. Today in Gardening with the Masters, we welcome Linda Garvin. She is the interim program director and agriculture agent for Valencia County and previously was with the Sandoval Extension. Linda, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Paget. All right, so today we're going to talk about common garden pests and how to manage them in an eco-friendly manner. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about integrated pest management, or IPM. And this is a multidisciplinary approach to pest management, which has many different approaches. Prevention is the key. So prevention is the first step for everything. And it also involves surveillance. So looking at your plants and looking for pests on a regular basis, and also sanitation. So getting rid of debris under your vegetable plants or your trees, or any fruit that might have fallen, in order to get rid of the fruits and vegetation that might harbor insect pests. So prevention is the best defense, and also having healthy soil, healthy plants, and a diversity in planting. So if you have healthy soils, you have healthy plants, and having a mixture of plants together helps ward off insect pests as well as weeds and diseases for plants. You also want to consider planting beneficial plants in your garden and your landscape in order to attract pollinator species and other beneficial insects that can help you manage your plants, and also have provide healthy pollinators for whatever you're growing in your landscape. In order to have them attracted to your property, you need to provide not only the plants that they will use for nectar and pollen and food, but also provide water sources for them. Especially here in our dry climate, they need to drink water just like we do. So having saucers with rocks in it or marbles, just some shallow pans out there with water with some little footholds so that they can rest on the, let's say, a little pebble in a terracotta saucer for a pot, and filling those with water so that they have a source readily available. Also providing plants that will give them shelter and overwintering habitat, such as leaves, mulch, prunings, and nesting boxes, such as the mason bee little homes that you see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide. You can also create really nice flower borders to create nectaries for those pollinators and beneficial insects. So this is at the Seed to Need Garden in Corrales. So not only is it doing heavy duty work to attract and provide for those pollinators and beneficial insects, it's beautiful to look at. So you want to plant small plants, small flowering plants that will attract adults of many beneficial insects because of their nectar. So there's a publication I have at the end of the presentation from NMSU that talks about what those plant species are and when and where to plant them. So salvias or sages and sweet alyssum are two really good hardworking pollinator plants that provide nectar and food for beneficial insects. This is from Sam Thompson, one of the Sandoval Master Gardener volunteers. And you can see she doesn't have a large strip of plants, but she has these little boxes that she's placed around her containers that she's growing peppers and other vegetables. So that's just enough to provide what those beneficial pollinators and beneficial insects that they need in order to have nectar and pollen, and also some harborage in the garden. So it doesn't need to take up a lot of space within your landscape. You can do it on a small scale like Sam has done here. And not only will you get those pollinator species, you'll also get a lot of natural predators who can help you manage your insect pest populations. So if everything is in balance, these natural predators can help you with those garden pests so they don't become too out of control and do major damage to your vegetable crops, especially. So there's all kinds of natural predators, such as parasitic wasps, who sting different pests. They can attack their egg cases. They can desiccate the egg cases. We have like the ladybugs who over here to the top right, that's a ladybug laying eggs there. So those are ladybug eggs. And here's a larval form. And those guys are just serious aphid eaters. And adults will eat aphids as well. So here's an aphid infested plant. So ladybugs and also lacewings. This is the larval form of the lacewing, and those guys eat tons and tons of aphids as well. So having that natural balance in your garden will do major work for you, so you don't have to do anything beyond what they can do for you. So some more good guys are ground beetles. You might recognize the guy up in the left-hand corner. They like to stand on their heads. So those are good beetles to have in your garden. So when you see them, be happy, because they're eating all kinds of pest insects within your garden. Taconid flies, they attack a lot of different pests and lay their eggs within them. And then it kills the insect itself. So for like the tomato hornworm, and there's a Japanese beetle right here, which we've been monitoring for them. So out east, this is a real pest in the garden. So far, so good. We haven't found a lot of them here in New Mexico. And also rove beetles that you'll find in mulch and in the soil. They do a lot to feed on those pest insects. Also, having habitat nesting spots for larger predators such as bats and bluebirds, kestrel boxes, putting in sunflower strips, barn owl boxes. So there are all kinds of creatures that you can enhance habitat for, that they can come and help you manage those insect pests. Another thing to think about when managing insect pests is to make sure you remove existing weeds. And a lot of our winter weeds create safe harbors for these insect pests to overwinter, such as the leafhopper. And that little leafhopper in the bottom right corner, those guys can go and feed on your vegetable plants, and they are vectors for carrying curly top virus, which can infect your tomatoes and your pepper plants. So it's breaking that cycle of the disease, the weed, and the insect pests. So be sure you remove weeds within your landscape and your garden beds, remove them and destroy them. If they have seed heads on them, you want to put them in the garbage and not compost them, because it probably won't get hot enough to kill the seeds. So they'll still be viable. And yes, so sanitation. So this is a big step here, sanitation, getting rid of those weeds in your landscape. Also, mulching beds and walkways. Number one, it helps keep the dust down. It keeps soil erosion from happening. It also makes it cleaner in the garden. It suppresses weed growth. So you can use cardboard as walkways and mulches. You can use hay as a mulch, or wood chips for walkways, pavers, and other things in walkways, just to have a nice, neat garden and also keep those weeds under control. Another thing to think about is crop rotation or vegetable rotation. So different vegetables will mine or take different nutrients from the soil. So you don't want to plant the same plant, let's say lettuce, in the same bed year after year after year. You want to rotate your vegetables so that if you bring in, let's say, a bean after a lettuce, they can add nitrogen to the soil. They will also take different nutrients from the soil. And keep those populations of pests from building up, because you're growing the same thing over and over. It also improves soil structure, which is good for plant health. It can manage soil-borne diseases. Like I said, certain diseases as well as insects are attracted to certain plants. So if you break up that cycle of planting the same thing over and over again, you can break up those insect and pest cycles, insect and disease cycles as well. Also nutrient cycling. Like I said, some plants add nitrogen to the soil. Other plants are heavy nitrogen feeders. So knowing those kind of things will help you in your crop rotations or your vegetable rotations. So, and I get a lot of times questions in emails like, what is this bug? How do I kill it? Before they even know what it is. So any time you use a spray, whether it's an organic pesticide or even soaps, insecticidal soaps, or any home remedies you might use, which I don't recommend, that should be your last resort and not your first reaction to when you see an insect in your gardens. You need to be able to identify the insect to know whether it's a good guy and to keep it, or if it's a pest or could become a pest in your garden, and then to make a management strategy. Also, you want to choose the most selective product. You don't want to use a broad spectrum product, which can kill a lot of pests and beneficials as well. And you want to, to read and follow the label, because it's the law. So you need to follow the label on those products as well before you apply them to your garden. The Audubon Society published a study, and it was talking about the kind of side effects of pesticides in the gardens, and how not only it affects your pests, but birds also eat those insects, and it can build up in their systems depending on what pesticide you're using, either in their blood or their fatty tissue. And they saw major declines in songbird populations over the past couple of years, and they believe it's because of insecticide use in the home garden. So everything is connected, and whatever you use in the garden, it will have long-ranging effects beyond what you can see within, your small landscaped area. So just be conscious that, what you do in your garden not only affects the insects there and the plants, but also larger mammals and birds within your garden. So, as I said, you need to know is it a friend or a foe. So become familiar with the insects in your gardens, and there's lots of resources out there, and I have a few at the end of the presentation. You want to support and enhance the habitat for those good insects, and you want to remove the bad guys before they get out of control. And if you need help identifying insects, you can always bring samples into the extension office for identification, or send photos to your agent, or we can even send insect specimens to the plant clinic down in Las Cruces and have the entomologists identify the insect pests. But normally your agent should know the common pests in your area. So here's our first poll. So just off the top here, Paget's going to launch the poll. So which of these is a good guy and which is the bad guy? So which is the friends?
So I just take a close look, because I'm afraid the poll will cover up the pictures.
Oh, right. So you have A, B down in the left to bottom, and C to the right. So take a gander. And now we're going to launch the poll. Okay, yes, you were correct. So which of these insects are your friends? A, B, A and B, or B and C? So click on the answer and submit. Okay, are you getting responses there?
Yeah, I've got 75%. So I'm going to wait 5 more seconds, and then I'm going to end the polling.
Okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, here we go.
Ta-da!
All right, and I'm sharing the results.
Okay, so A, 5%, that's good. B, yeah, A and B and C is correct. So B, here, let's close the poll.
Okay.
I did that. And we'll go to the next slide, which tells you what these guys are. Okay, now my little thing is not moving. Come on. Come on. There we go. It's taking a pause. It needed rest. Okay, so the top one is the larvae of the Colorado potato beetle, which can do some damage in your garden. B is a lacewing nymph, which is a good guy. So we like lacewings. Those little nymphs, man, they're just aphid eaters. They love aphids. And to the right is the ladybug nymph. So you may think of ladybugs as these beautiful little round beetles with little black spots, and they might be orange or red or yellow even. But you don't normally think of ladybugs as being in this life stage form. So you need to know those insects throughout their life cycle, what they look like, so that you don't get rid of them when you should be keeping them in your garden. So life cycles, here at the top, we have the ladybugs. So she is an aphid destroyer. You have the eggs to the far left here. So you get to know what those egg masses look like. There's that larvae again. They remind me of little dinosaurs. They're all spiky. Those guys just love to eat aphids. Then you have the larval form starting to pupate. So this is a pupa of a ladybug, and then this will develop into the adult stage of this ladybug. So if you see any of these guys in your garden, you want to keep them. And noted also is that the colors can change a bit. Like this larvae, instead of having yellowish on its back, could have a reddish or orangish even. Oops, sorry about that. Go back. And the pupa can also be kind of yellowy or orangey, or maybe even a dull tan. So the color phases will be different, but it's the same ladybug. But down below, you have the Colorado potato beetle, which you do not want in your garden because it can do some really good damage with the foliage and also eating on roots. So the egg masses look very similar. Here is that larval form and a pupa form, and there's the adult form. So the Colorado potato beetle, you want to know what all these forms look like. If you can't distinguish, maybe wait a bit until you see what the next life stage is, whether you want to remove it or not before, if you can't make a positive ID. But it's important to know what those life cycles are. Here's the life stage of a green lacewing. So the eggs are on the top right. They're like these delicate little white egg cases that hang from these long filaments. That's very characteristic right there. And then they pupate and become this kind of little cottony mass. And then they grow and become the larval form. And then that moves into the adult form. So there's that larval form, which kind of looks like a ladybug larvae as well. And then the adult lacewing that you'll find in the garden. So you want to keep all these when you see them in your gardens with your plants. So they can suck dry aphids and small caterpillars. So that's definitely something you want to have happening in your garden. You can also look at leaf damage and get a good idea of what's been visiting your garden and what's feeding on your plants. So vine weevil makes these little bites along the margins of the leaves or the edges of the leaves. The earwing, you'll see these kind of larger holes within the veins within the plant, the leaf. Leaf beetles cause these kind of little shot hole, little pinpricks in the leaves. And if you have an infestation, you'll see the whole leaf just kind of dotted with these little pinprick holes. Grasshoppers, kind of uneven eating. They can take out the whole leaf and leave the veins, or have big munchy marks all over the leaves. Thrips, they have sucking mouth parts, so they'll take that proboscis and put it in between the cell layers of the leaf and suck out the content inside, and you get this kind of bronzing coloration on the underside of the leaves, which is very characteristic. Spider mites kind of leave this stippling on the leaf. They also will suck out the cell content of the leaf and leave this kind of mottled look on the leaf itself. Leaf miners, you'll see them, there are trails in the leaf. They get in between the leaf surface, and then they mine throughout the cells of the leaf and eat through and suck out all the cells within. And then here's a gall mite, which is mostly on trees. So you see this little egg cases that are forming within this rolled edges of the leaf. So that's another way of looking at damage from insects and trying to figure out what they are. But not all holes in leaves are bad. Sometimes you see these perfectly concentric holes in leaves, and these are from leaf cutter bees, such as mason bees. So they're taking those cuts out of the leaves, they're taking that little piece that they've cut back to wherever they're laying their eggs, and they're making little nests for their eggs. So they wrap an egg up in the leaf, they leave it with a pollen ball, so when it starts forming, the little larvae will start eating all that pollen ball. So that's all self-contained within that leaf that they've cut out, that little piece of the leaf. So not all holes in leaves are bad. So insects and more best management tools, the best thing you can do is to look around your garden frequently, especially during the peak of the garden, the vegetable season, going out every morning and every, late afternoon, or not late afternoon, but early evening, and looking for insect pests and seeing what's going on so that you can keep on top of things. And if there's a problem brewing in the garden, that you can stay on top of it and deal with things before they become a major issue. So using your eyes to look for insects, also signs of the insect pests, and also using your hands to remove those insect pests, because that's one of the best ways to do that. I always carry around I have a little container with a handle that I put soapy water in. I just put dish detergent in there and some water, and I go around my garden and I start looking for pests. And when I see something, I pick it off. Let's say it's a caterpillar or something that I know is a pest, I'll pick it off and put it in there. So the soap kind of helps keep it in the water so it can't crawl out. There's surface tension on the water, so if they're just lying on top, they can float and kind of swim over to the side and get out. So the soap kind of helps keep them in the water, and they'll drown. So that's a good way to have something like that handy, so you can put all your pests in there and they won't escape back into your garden again. So what things can you look for right now in the spring with the new green growth on your plants? Aphids will be coming out in full numbers. They're attracted to that juicy new leaf formations. So those very tender leaves. This is my peach tree in our front yard. I just went out yesterday and took this picture. You can see it's actually seeping balls of sugar water. So it's so much sap is being pulled up into the trunk. And you can see all that sticky sweet liquid is attracting ants. So I also saw ants crawling up it. I saw the ants first, and then in the sunlight, I saw those, those sugar water. And that is perfect conditions for knowing that aphids are soon to follow if you don't see them right now. So the ants will actually go and milk aphids, which feed on the sweet inner cellular liquid within the cells of the leaves. And that sugar water, they just drink so much, they have to excrete it. And so ants will come and tend the aphids and actually milk them and eat the sugar water from the aphids. And another sign that aphids are there is you'll see curling of the leaves, and also this kind of this kind of crunchy looking distorted look of the leaf. And that's because the aphids are feeding underneath the leaf and sucking out the water content within the cells of that leaf, and they're collapsing. So the leaf itself is collapsing in on itself. So you see this kind of modeling on the leaf. That's also a sign that aphids are actively feeding on your plant. So aphids, I always thought aphids were just green, but no, aphids come in all different colors, every hue of the rainbow. They are can be found in that color. So it's pretty distinctive, their bodies. It's kind of this little elliptical body with, it has like two little gas pipes on this rear end right here. So that's very indicative of aphids. And if you, if you look under a hand lens, you can see all the characteristics of the aphid. But they come in all different colors and all different sizes. Some are very big and some are really small. But you'll see them on the undersides of leaves usually. So things that you can do with your aphids, number one, you don't have to do anything. Just wait a bit and the beneficials will come. Those ladybug nymphs will come. The lacewings will come. On that peach tree I showed you last year, I did a thing on aphids that were attacking it. And the next day I went out and it was full of ladybug larvae feeding on the aphids. So you can also wash them off with a strong jet of water from a hose. So if you have one of those nozzle heads that will do a strong stream, you can knock them off and they won't be able to climb back up onto the plant. So you can knock off a large population of aphids just using a hose, but you need to be sure to get under the leaves. And as a last resort, you could treat it with insecticidal soaps. But as I said, if you wait, just wait a bit, they'll come. This was in my garden last year as well. So here's some kale and here's some celery full of aphids here. And then you see that little ladybug pupae eating the aphids. And also here's some larvae over here. And down here, you can see the larvae feeding on the aphids. So if you just wait a bit, be patient, those beneficial insects will come. And if you take all the aphids off, they won't have anything to eat. So they won't be hanging around in your garden to help you out with your pest management. Another thing I always get questions about is codling moths. Most of the insects I have in my presentation are for vegetables, but codling moths, I always get questions in the spring, and it's usually after it's too late to do anything. So right now is the time to look out for those codling moths, which are just these little gray moths that not very, nothing to draw your attention to them. So they overwinter in the bark of the tree as a larvae. And then they pupate, they mature, and now the adults, like right now, soon, a couple days, like 6 to 14 days after petal fall. So now the apple trees might be blooming now or pretty soon blooming. When they're halfway done dropping petals, that's when you need to treat for codling moths because the adults are out mating and laying eggs on the newly forming fruit. So if you don't get application of, I'll talk about what you can use, but anyway, if you don't get them early on in the season, then it's too late. Then you'll get wormy apples, just like in the bottom here with the codling moth eating larvae tunneling its way through all your nice apple fruits. Things you can do, you can just leave it if you don't mind, some wormy apples. You can use sticky traps to monitor populations to know when they're out and about. You'll see the adult moths get stuck on the sticky trap here. This little orange ring is a pheromone disruptor. So if you have neighbors with apples and you have apples, you can put those on the limbs and it releases a pheromone which confuses the male moths so they don't mate, supposedly. Other things you can do is this picture of the tree trunk, this little band here is just a piece of cardboard that has been tied around the trunk. So the larvae of the moth they'll lay eggs and the larvae will travel down and settle underneath that band of cardboard. And you can basically check it and you'll see the larvae kind of nestling within the cardboard. So you can, after a certain amount of time, take it off at the end, near the end of the season, and put those in the garbage can. So you get rid of one of the stages of the life cycle to help disrupt that life cycle of the codling moth. You can also use fruit barriers. So down in the corner at the right, they're like little pantyhose, little footies that you can put over your fruit. If you have hundreds and hundreds of apples, it's not very practical. But if you have, a couple dozen that you really want to protect, you can put those on the apple while it forms, and it will prevent codling moths as well as apple maggot from getting into the fruit and having the larvae get in your apple. You can also use spinosad, which is a BT, which is a bacteria that is organically approved that you can spray 10 to 14 days after the first petal drop, and then follow the label directions for a couple more treatments in order to keep those moths from laying eggs within the fruit itself. And also sanitation is important. So clean up dropped fruit on the ground because that's where the larvae is, and also the egg masses. So if it's fallen to the ground, clean them up and throw them out.
Linda,
Yes.
I have a question about codling moths from Linda.
Mhm.
She has a continuing problem with codling moths on peach, pear, and apple trees, even with using the spinosad spray. She
Yeah,
wants to know, how often should she use it, and does it degrade in the bottle over winter?
there should be an expiration date on your bottle. Also, it can be ineffective in that the sinking of the petal drop might be, the life cycle of the codling moth might not be in sync with the petal drop of your apple trees. So that's something that you don't have any control over and don't know about, except that you know that the spinoset's not working. So it's one of those things that it can work really well or it can be really frustrating. And I don't have any tips or ways to help you figure out what to do with your applications. It's really complex and complicated. So, maybe the barriers might work, or maybe it might come back in sync where the petal fall actually syncs up with the moths. But I'm thinking, with our climate, every year is different. It's getting hotter earlier in the season, that they just might, be thrown off as well in their life cycle. So I'm sorry, I can look into more of that. Send me an email and maybe we can figure it out. I can talk to fruit specialists and see what they say about that. Okay, some other ones now that they're noticing, they usually notice in late winter when the leaves are off the canopy of their trees, they'll notice that they've had bagworms, and they've probably been there for years, but they just, for some reason or another noticed that they're there. They're very difficult to manage in that they live most of their lives in these little protected cocoons made out of the leaves of whatever tree or plant they're on. So that basically their whole mating cycle, the egg laying, the larvae, the pupating is all happening within that very protective leaf house. So in order to manage them, the best thing to do is to cut them off the twigs of your trees if you can reach them, and be sure you get the little silk thread that is attached to the twig. So you can just cut the twig off at behind the bag and put them in the garbage. Otherwise, the only way you can spray BT is when in early summer, late midsummer, you'll start seeing little tiny green larvae or caterpillars hanging off silk threads from trees and kind of waving in the breeze. They are trying to travel to a new spot to make a new home and to reproduce. So that's when they're exposed and out of their home. That's the only time you can really use something like a BT spray to knock down populations. So you need to keep on top of those. Otherwise, they will take over your tree and they can defoliate trees and do a lot of damage eventually. More garden pests, so squash bugs. I think everybody knows what squash bugs are. Once they're there, they're very hard to manage. They'll find you. They attack all cucurbits, so cucumbers, squashes. They can even attack melons. They lay their eggs on the undersides of the leaves in a characteristic V pattern. So at the bottom right, you can see them in the little V crook on the other underside of the leaf, those little kind of orangey egg cells. And that's very characteristic. So if you see that and you have your little pest pool, you can go and use your thumb and scrape them off the leaf and put the eggs into the pest pool and get rid of them before they start that whole life cycle. Adults overwinter in crop debris, so like weeds and vegetation that's left on, let's say you leave your zucchini plants and they're all dried up, but that vegetation is still kind of draped over the soil. They'll overwinter in that plant debris. So you need to clean up your garden and get rid of those so that they don't have harborage to overwinter as adults. some things you can do. Oh, here's the life cycle. So the egg masses are on the top left, going down to the young nymphs. So they kind of look a little bit like aphids when they're very young because they're soft bodied and they're grayish colored. And then they morph into the adult stage. So knowing what they look like in their life stage, so you know to get rid of them. So even young nymphs you can get rid of with packing or duct tape. So go around with a, have your little toolkit of pest pest gear, which can include packing tape or duct tape. So you just wrap it around your fingers and you can get all those immature nymph stage of the squash bugs. And then just put those in the garbage. That's one thing you can do, aside from scraping the eggs off. Other thing you can do is just don't plant zucchini and go to your farmer's market or go to the grocery store or hope your neighbor has a lot of extra. You can use row covers to try to control them or manage them. I'm not going to say control. You can't control anything. So you can manage them with covers, row covers to keep the adults from laying eggs and getting in there. Also planting your squash early. So with transplants, so they have a better chance of kind of out maneuvering the squash bugs, or planting later in the season, like after the 4th of July. These are not scientifically proven. They're just anecdotal of people saying that might work. And don't plant summer squash and winter squash. Take your pick, do one or the other, or don't plant either of them and get it from your friendly farmer's market. So even having row covers isn't a guarantee that you're not going to get squash bugs, because they're very ingenious, and they'll get under row covers, they'll get in somehow. So they're very hard to manage. Other things you can do is do board traps, or put cardboard or wide pieces of board near your squash plants. They like to get under there. The adults get under those boards and pieces of cardboard where it's moist and cool during the day. So in the morning, you can go out when they're a little chilled and not as active. Just lift up the piece of cardboard or the piece of wood, and with a shop vac, you can vacuum them up and get rid of them that way, and then empty them into soapy water so they drown and don't come back after you try to get rid of them. So it's also recommended not to mulch your squash or your zucchini plants because the adults like to hide under mulches during the heat of the day. So you don't want that there. Okay, so moving on, also early spring, late summer, or early spring into early summer, you'll see flea beetles. They like a lot of our greens that we grow. I always get them in the late spring, early summer on my greens, like mustard greens, arugula. You can see there's that shot hole effect. Those little pinholes within the leaves is very characteristic. So you can just wait them out. The plant will grow big enough. They'll have their little feed, and it's not going to kill the plant per se. You can try row covers, but I think that's a lot of work for flea beetles, especially if you just let your plant grow big enough. They're going to outgrow the flea beetles themselves. You can also use diatomaceous earth, which is very rough on their underbellies. So you can sprinkle that over your plants and on the earth around them to keep them from feeding on the leaves. So that's something safe that you can do to prevent them. The Colorado potato beetle is becoming more and more of a pest in our veggie gardens. So the easiest thing to do is hand remove the egg cases with your thumb from the underside of leaves. Also take out the larvae and the pupa forms. Get those adults. You can put them in your pest pool and drown them all. You can also use BT, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. That's a bacteria that can be sprayed on your plants, which the larvae will ingest, and it affects their internal digestive system and eats them from the inside out. But the best thing is to hand pick everything. You can wait and see, because there are certain predaceous there's a predaceous stink bug that will parasitize the larvae of that stink bug. So if you wait long enough, you can have that happen, or not the stink bug, of the Colorado potato beetle. So it looks like, actually, it reminds me of the squash bug. So, hey, but this is a good guy. So you need to know the difference between a stink bug and a squash bug. Oh, oh my goodness. Okay, so spotted cucumber beetle is the next one. I haven't seen this one too much. Once in a while, I'll see one flying by. But if you have cucumbers, they really like cucumbers. And they don't do so much damage in themselves, just feeding on the foliage of the plant. It's that they can carry bacterial wilt, which is a disease that affects plants. So you'll get your cucumber plants, or even other cucurbits. They'll start wilting during the day, and they won't revive back in the late afternoon when normally a plant would. During the day with water stress and heat stress, it will wilt, but it will come back again in the evening. So if you start seeing that it's not reviving at the end of the day, then it might have bacterial wilt, which will also start, the leaves will start dying off and the plant just looks horrible, and then eventually it will die. So things that you can do is, once again, getting rid of all those mustard weeds that are around. They're so common here in New Mexico, and they overwinter in those weeds. Growing resistant cucumber cultivars and other members of the cucurbit family, like melons and squashes and cucumbers. So there are resistant varieties to bacterial wilt, so you can select for that when you get your seeds. Remove the weeds. Row covers you can help, but also it hinders pollination, so you might not get a lot of good fruit production. So what's the point of that if you're growing cucumbers and not going to get many fruits because you don't have good pollination happening? You can also, as a last resort, treat with a pyrethrum. Like I said, I haven't seen too much of this. I don't know if any of you have had major issues with cucumber beetle, but just something to look out for. Another one I saw a lot last summer, the 10-line Jude beetle. The adult doesn't do much except be obnoxious and kind of fly into your head. They have those large feathery antennae that helps the males locate the females. So they can spend years underground as grubs in the soils. And it's the grubs that can do the damage, not only to tree roots, but also if you have turf, they can also be grubs that will eat your turf, your grass roots. So the adults live only a month. So, and usually they're out in June, and that's why they're called 10-line June beetles. So their whole adult month that they're alive, their whole role is to reproduce and create, offspring for the next generation. Here's a picture of a fruit tree, and you can see the white grubs not very well. It's not a very good picture, but you can, if you have fruit trees that are kind of looking stressed or stunted, you might want to check the roots and see if there's any grubs in there that are feeding on the roots, which will limit the amount of water and nutrients that that tree can take up. So even if you're giving them enough water, if the roots are being damaged, they can't take the water up through the roots to the rest of the plant. So check for grubs in the roots of your fruit trees if you're seeing issues. Also, they can cause, if you have turf, they'll cause large brown circles, dead circles. So pull up your grass and look underneath and see if you can find any grubs in the soil underneath your turf. And there are different products that you can use to kill the grubs as well. Beetles in general, so you may not need to do anything if they're not causing an issue. You can catch adults with traps, baits, and lures. So here's some. They're using these plastic yellow jugs. So you can buy lures. You put them in the lure in there. It's usually a powder or something, and you add water and it attracts them, and they'll get into the jugs and then they can't get out. So you basically are drowning them in the lure or the trap. Also, for real issues as a last resort, there are also granules and drenches for grubs that you can put in the soil to kill the grubs if they're causing major damage. Next are thrips. So thrips are so tiny, you probably won't even see them, but you'll see that damage. If you remember that leaf way in the back, I have another picture next up, but they suck out the contents of the cells within the leaves and cause that kind of bronzing effect on the leaf surface and underneath. They probably the damage to the leaves isn't going to kill the plant, but they can carry tomato spotted wilt virus, which can affect tomatoes and other plants in the Solanaceae family. So sweet peppers, hot peppers, eggplants. They have rasping, sucking mouth parts. So they put that into the plant, the leaf cell, and they rasp back and forth and then suck out the contents. The adults lay their eggs in leaf tissue. And then you can see the damage they leave behind with that kind of bronzy bleach look in the leaf, and they'll be dry looking. Look for frass or insect poop, pellets, and small white desiccated material left after feeding. So it's kind of like this kind of fluffy aftermath of a feeding frenzy underneath leaves. They also, on these 2 tomato plants where you see that little yellow mottling and that necrotic little rings, dead rings on the flesh of the fruit, that's where they've been feeding on the fruit themselves with that rasping, sucking mouth part. So the best thing you can do is to get rid of the weeds, like I said. So getting rid of weeds is, in the long term, a great management strategy for a lot of these insect pests. Even more insects. Let's see. I'm going to move that. Okay. So at the top, there's that thrip. That's enlarged. This is the thrip, size of a thrip. So they're just, you can barely see them, but you can see the damage really clearly on this leaf, that kind of bronzing look. So you can remove them with a strong jet stream of water. So if you have a good nozzle that you can make it to really a strong stream of water, you can get a lot of them off with that. They like dry plants, so make sure, if you keep your plants well moistened, they won't be as likely to feed on your plants. Remove damaged leaves. So if you see those leaves and you can spare them, you can pick the leaves off that have been severely affected and put them in the garbage. Also, there's some insecticidal soaps you can use for heavy infestation, but only as a last resort. Another thing that happens in New Mexico, not only on some of our vegetable crops, but also a lot of our shrubbery and other crops. I've been called out several times for euonymus hedges, where they were infested with spider mites. So you'll see the webbing, just like a spider webs, webbing underneath the leaves or in between little small branches of the plant. You'll see little casts of skin. Once they've molted out the mite, you can see them. They're kind of a reddish color or browny orangey color, but they're very, very small. So if you have a hand lens, that will help you see them on the underside of the plants or in between little branchlets or bracts of the leaves. And you'll definitely see that cobwebbing from the spider mites. So they love hot, dry climates. So New Mexico is a wonderful home for the spider mite. They really like it here. And you can also use jets of water to kind of get them off the leaves and get them off the plant. Severe infestation, there are products you can use. Next one, grasshoppers. Yes, lots of grasshoppers here in New Mexico, over 160 species. So in the fall, they lay their eggs out in the grasslands in the east of New Mexico. So if we have a wet fall, a moist fall, it's easy for them to lay their eggs. So we'll have a good population of grasshoppers the next spring. But if it's been a very dry fall, it's hard for them to lay their eggs and for those eggs to hatch in the spring. And when they hatch in the spring, they're looking for fresh green plants. So that's why they're coming west to like our gardens and all our lush veggie plants and our landscape plants. They're looking for things to eat. The nymphs hatch out in the spring and eat the seedlings. You can try to use row covers. There's also a organic product called Nolo Bait, but it has a very short shelf life and it needs to be refrigerated. So whether it's going to be good, effective when applied, that's hard to say. And it's only for the smaller grasshoppers. It won't really have an effect on the larger grasshoppers. Another big insect pest that's big, literally big, is the tomato hornworm. So you can find them on your tomato plant. You'll go out in the morning, go to bed, come back in the morning, and half your tomato plant has been eaten down to almost nothing. So these guys are voracious eaters, the caterpillars. They can defoliate a plant in a day or a night, actually. So, and they're very hard to see because they blend in so perfectly with that tomato plant. If you get a black light, you can go out in the evening and look for them, and they'll glow in the dark. So that's pretty cool. So you get a black light, go out in the evening and look for your tomato hornworm, have your pest pool with you. You can pull them off, put them there. If you have chickens and your chickens will eat them, you can feed them to your chickens. Sometimes when you're digging around in your garden bed, you'll find the cocoons of the tomato hornworm in the earth. So you can just, if you're working in the soil and you see them, you can pull them out and then put them in the garbage. And they are the larvae stage of the hawk moth or the hummingbird moth. We'll go back there. So there, I took that picture before I knew what they were, but I was just so fascinated. It's the first time I'd seen them. So that's the adult form of the tomato hornworm. White cabbage worm moth, they can do some damage. Usually it's earlier in the growing season. There's the egg cases up at the top right, kind of look like ladybug egg cases to me. They're that little white moth that flies around. They lay their eggs. The eggs hatch out into caterpillars or the larvae, and the larvae are the one who can do all the damage. So you can come out and find your plant half eaten, and then all those little black pellets underneath that, whatever that plant is. It's in the brassicaceae family. So maybe it's collard greens, all those little black things that is poop from that caterpillar from all the leaf it's been eating. So you can see their frass and the eaten leaves are signs that the insect is there. So those are easy enough to just pull off with your hands, pull off the egg cases, pull off that little larvae with your hand and put it in your pest pool. You can hand pick them and give them to your chickens. You can try row covers. I don't think they're that big a deal, but if you have issues, maybe these are things you want to do. There are also some natural predators. The trichogramma wasp will parasitize the eggs of the moth. So they'll go and lay their eggs within the eggs and kill the eggs. You can also use BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, on any larval form of an insect. Some of them are very specific to one insect species, and others are very broad spectrum. So, it may kill that cabbage looper larvae, but it also may kill that monarch butterfly caterpillar as well. So you need to think more about, when you use that and how you use it, even though it's organic. Okay, so here's our next poll, friend or foe. Let's see if we remember any of these. Some of them are tricky because I didn't have them in the presentation, but you may know them. So Paget, can you launch the poll? Yep. Okay. So which ones are friends? So we got, you can move your poll around with your cursor on your computer. So A, some kind of little larval form. B's another larvae form or a caterpillar. C's a larval form. D is a pupa of an insect form. E is a little pupa as well. And then F is a caterpillar, and G is a caterpillar. So, but are they good caterpillars or are they pest caterpillars? So pick all the ones that are friendly.
Okay, we're still getting answers.
Okay. And I'm submitting my poll, which is cheating. Okay, since I know the answers.
All right, we're going to wind this up in a few more seconds. So get those answers in.
Yeah. See how smart you all are out there.
Okay, I'm ending the polling now
Okay.
and sharing the results.
Okay. Ooh. Okay, so it's all over. Everyone thought F was good. So which is F? Oh, yes. Okay. So let's go. I'm going to close the results and I'll show you what they are. It takes it a second to recuperate from polling. Come on. Yeah. There we go. Okay. So A are monarch butterfly nymphs. So they're kind of funky looking, pretty distinguishable. B is a painted lady, which is a beautiful pollinator butterfly species. So that's a good guy. C, a tiger tail, tiger swallowtail. So that's a good guy. He looks really funky to me. It looks like a space alien. D at the top are ladybug pupae. E is a bad guy, Colorado potato beetle, poor guy. F is monarch butterfly caterpillar. So everybody, they liked that. Good. G was that white cabbage looper or that cabbage moth, the white cabbage moth. That's the larval form. So very good. So it just goes to show you really need to get more familiar with your insect populations and what they look like in all their life stages.
We have a question, Linda.
Uh-huh.
Leaving plant stems, such as sunflowers, in place provides habitat for bees to lay eggs.
Right.
How should we decide what to leave for beneficial species versus what to remove due to pests and diseases?
Okay, so flowering plants like sunflowers and all those nectary plants, asters, let's see. Flowering plants that aren't vegetable plants, you can leave because a lot of them have the hollow stems, so they'll have bees overwintering their eggs in there or themselves as adults overwintering. But if they're vegetable plants, I would clean up my garden. If it's an actual vegetable plant, like your zucchini vines, you can pull those up because those are harborages for those adult squash bugs. So you want to get rid of things in your garden that may harbor pests, those vegetable plants. So the melons, the squashes, the cucumber vines, your tomato plants. So getting rid of your veggie plants that are spent, they're not going to, regrow. You can keep your greens, like I have greens all year round in my little horse trough beds. But if they're, vegetable plants that only are annuals and they only do one growing season, I would pull those up, but leave flowering plants until the spring to kind of clean up your garden before you start planting again, as a rule of thumb. Some resources for you all. So IPM, biological control. This is online. It's a nice little booklet. Shows life cycles of all these beneficial insects. There's an integrated pest management for home gardeners brochure on the NMSU website. Here's another one on those using insectary plants to attract and sustain beneficial insects. So that's all I have. You can go to the NMSU publication site and they have topics. There's a horticulture section, so all kinds of things about growing fruits, vegetables, landscape plants, insect management, diseases, anything you want to know is in there probably. If you have questions outside of that, you can also, contact your master gardeners or your agent to help you find solutions to your insect problems. And that's all I have for the presentation.